Hi, I'm Andy Foster, New Zealand First MP. We're here at the New Zealand First Convention in Palmerston North. I'm here with Chris Trotter, a good friend who's just spoken to us, inspiring speech to us at the convention. And Chris, great to have you here.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Look, we've got quite a number of things that we wanted to traverse with you, but I wanted to start off with, you were there at a pivotal moment in New Zealand politics. In fact, we've had many pivotal moments. The breakaway of the new Labour Party from Labour. You've talked a lot about the neoliberal experiment that we've been going through for the last 40 years, but you were there at that time for the breakaway of New Labour. And I think you could also say that New Zealand First is not aligned with that neoliberal direction either.
There were two really inspiring figures at that time, Jim Anderton, of course, but also Winston. Anderton was the first to call time on the neoliberal revolution, or Rogernomics, as it was known then. And New Labour was the party that emerged from the split in the Labour Party. But not too long after New Labour, of course, there came New Zealand First, because Winston Peters, albeit from the centre-right perspective, was unwilling to continue down the path of Ruth Richardson and Jenny Shipley. And so you got these two giants, if you like, of alternative politics in New Zealand. And it was a pivotal time, and Jim Anderton played an important role, and the alliance which he eventually formed was in coalition with Labour from 1999 until 2002, and he remained alongside Helen Clark for another 6 years, I think.
That sounds about right.
Yeah. So, it was a pivotal time, and it taught me how very, very difficult it is to create a new party and to sustain it. And it, of course, makes me all the more aware of how extraordinary New Zealand First is, because, as people may have noticed, the Alliance is no longer with us.
One of their offshoots is, unfortunately, but
well, yeah. The Greens were always there before. They joined the Alliance as a constituent party, and then they left. The Greens were crucial to Jim's success, and explain, I think, in large measure, the ultimate failure of the Alliance. But New Zealand First is emphatically still with us, and still a political party that is alive and kicking. It has been a long time since I have sat and watched plenary democracy at work, and it just reminded me how absolutely vital that kind of deliberation is. Going into workshops, everyone huddling together, writing things up on butcher's paper. I mean, that is a kind of democracy, but it doesn't hold a candle to what I watched unfold this morning.
Chris, you've also talked about the period from 1935 to 1985, so, Michael Joseph Savage to Roger Douglas and co., being a time of compassionate and enterprising state, whereas what you're obviously saying is we've lost possibly both of those elements, compassion and certainly the enterprise.
Yes. Well, and New Zealand's always been an enterprising state because, frankly, only the state was large enough in New Zealand to undertake the sort of nation building that was required for a very young country. And so you've had that kind of enterprising state that built railways, that built dams, that strung, electricity wires across the country, that created a university system after it had created a secondary system, after it had created a primary system, had a healthcare service that was the envy of many countries around the world. So yes, a very enterprising state, not afraid to get its hands dirty, building things and creating institutions that would help other people build things. and a compassionate state, and that is where people like Michael Joseph Savage step into the picture. And before him, even Richard John Seddon and the Liberal government. This country used to be called the social laboratory of the world. And at home, I've got an American set of encyclopedias from the 1950s, and the entry under New Zealand has a little introduction where we were described as the best governed country in the world. So, people forget this. We have been subjected to endless propaganda about how bad it was before 1984, before Rogernomics and euthanasia. You couldn't get a decent cup of coffee. You had to apply for, overseas funds to get a newspaper subscription. I mean, all these stories just sounded so terrible. Whereas, in fact, that state, the one that came into being in recognisable form with the social welfare state created by the Labour Party, and then a national party which continued to build things, continued to hold national development conferences, continued to tax people quite highly so that they could have the education system and the health system. That's all gone now.
So where have we gone with the post-1985, both in terms of compassion and the enterprise?
Yeah, we've gone where the rest of the world has gone. We've gone where the rest of the world demanded we go, which is a neoliberal state, a neoliberal economy, a neoliberal society, one founded on free market principles, one that sees no useful role for the state other than keeping the peace and making sure that property is protected. This is the world, the global economy, a world where individualism is prized above all other things. And it has been an absolutely undeniable failure. Neoliberalism really is a zombie ideology because in 2008, 2009, it was tested to destruction. The Great Recession, the collapse, the near collapse of the entire financial system of the world. It was hours away, so we're told. And it proved that all of those ideas that we were told were going to be the salvation of us actually didn't work. And they hadn't been working for quite some time. There'd been crisis after crisis after crisis. That was only, the most terrifying. That's where we are now. But the point I tried to make in my speech to the convention is that it's still there. Governments come, governments go, but those ideas remain in place. The people who believe in them continue to run things. And, the pernicious effect of an ideology that tends towards disintegration of society rather than cohesiveness within society is producing all kinds of, pathologies, social pathologies. And it's not nostalgic to say we should go back to where we made the wrong turn and take the right turn, because it makes way less sense to keep driving at speed towards a precipice.
One of the things you also talked about to the in your speech to the convention, very, very good speech, I must say, really inspiring. And I'm going to be looking up a few of the people that you referred to. But you talked about the permanent government, and I think a lot of people would relate to that. The permanent government, that is not the elected one, but that is the unelected. Right, people who've got a mission. I'd be interested in your view of that mission too.
It's more than people with a mission, although they do exist. I mean, individuals like Bryce Wilkinson, who, like rust, never sleeps. He was one of the movers and shakers behind Rogernomics. back in 1984, in the years around 1984, and he's still there with the New Zealand Initiative, still, shouting onward, onward, no slacking, onward. And so there are individuals,
but sometimes they challenge some of the things that are being done, which are in the name of that neoliberal experiment you talked about.
Yeah, well, there's nothing like a purist. But it's more than that, because modern states have a whole lot of other things that they have to do to keep working. They need a judiciary. They need an education system capable of turning out the specialists, the experts needed to keep things going. They require the tens of thousands of teachers, academics, public servants. I mean, all of these groups, they are a permanent government. And we used to call them that without a twinge of fear, because, you needed people to keep the lights on, right? That's what they're there for. But what happened after 1984 was that those institutions became imbued partly with the ideology of neoliberalism, the whole free market ideology, but also with the ideologies that kind of grow out of a society where solidarity no longer counts, where social cohesion begins to break down.
Individualism takes over.
Well, yeah, but more than that, as the young man who spoke before me, I mean, he talked about we're New Zealanders. He quoted Keith Holyoake. We are all New Zealanders. Well, you see, once this new ideology gets going, then it becomes harder and harder to say that because, well, actually, we're all women, or we're all LGBTQ+, or we're all Maori, or we're all trans, or we're all, it just breaks down into endless identities, which now take precedence over the whole. So, rather than the whole being greater than the sum of its parts, the whole has simply dissolved into its parts, and it's now very difficult to actually try and reconstruct that collective identity, which you need if you're going to have a nation. I mean, without people sharing in the idea of what New Zealand is and what it wants to do, very hard to have a New Zealand. If 1/5 of the country are saying you have no legitimacy here, you stole this country from us, we demand redress and more, well, that's a lot of people saying we don't believe in our country anymore.
Or they're rejecting part of their own ancestry in many cases as well.
Well, it's difficult. You look at the UK, the whole immigration question there is tearing, England to bits. Nations are ideas, but they're built around, the communities that share in the ideas, believe in the ideas, benefit from the ideas, and will do a lot to defend the idea of what the nation is. I mean, this country lost thousands and thousands of its young men under its flag in 2 world wars, when it wasn't very big to begin with. So losing 12, 13,000 of your finest young men, that's a high price to pay to keep your flag flying. But people paid it. And you ask yourself now, how many people would die for the New Zealand flag today?
Or the New Zealand country. Look, Chris, one of the things that kind of moves us on to the ability to be able to challenge some of those kind of thoughts and those different separate identity thoughts, whatever it might be. Most people get shouted down, but you've been very, very strong, a prominent voice in the Free Speech Union, and some people might say, well, that's something which you don't really expect a man who's I regarded as being of the left to be saying. But can you just sort of tell us a little bit more about why that principle of free speech is just so important to essentially having a debate around any of those issues, but those issues which we're breaking the country down, that we actually allow a conversation which hopefully brings us back together again.
Yeah, well, the point of free speech was illustrated, I think, quite brilliantly in the remit debate that I was privileged to witness earlier. People stand and put their position. Someone raises a point in opposition. Someone is clever enough listening to the discussion to synthesize the essence of both positions. The original proposition is amended. There's more discussion. Everybody hears it. Everybody's there. So as the discussion goes on, you can feel the room begin to coalesce around a solution, and it's put to the vote, and a decision is made. I mean, it is a system that can be cumbersome. It's a system that can make people want to tear their hair out at times, but it's a system that you feel that you own.
Yes, it can be a bit messy, but it's evolving.
Yeah, well, as I think it was Churchill who said, democracy is a terrible system of government, except for all the others.
Yes,
right.
Yes.
And when you see democracy in action, when you see freedom of speech in action, you realize how absolutely crucial it is. And when you see it denied, if you've got any democratic bones in your body, when you see it denied, you rebel. You absolutely rebel. You want to stand up and do something about it. I always think, when people talk about free speech, of the Norman Rockwell painting. He had paintings for the 4 freedoms. And the freedom of speech painting is lovely. It's obviously an ordinary working guy who's come to the town meeting, still dressed in his work clothes, and he's standing up and he's saying his piece, and there's someone who looks like the local doctor, and there's others, who could be the local shopkeeper, and they're all listening. And it's a brilliant painting because it shows you why freedom of speech is so crucial, and why respect for what people say is important, and why it is so vital that they be given their say, regardless of who they are, be they the town doctor or the town mechanic, it doesn't matter. And we need to tell these stories and show these paintings again, because I grew up with them, and my father and his generation defeated fascism, which is the antithesis of free speech. And there were stories and there were principles which you just, took in with your mother's milk. I'm not so sure that those stories are told enough now.
Do you think, you see fascism as the enemy of free speech, but it does feel that we have multiple enemies of free speech these days. And we talked about Labour and Labour's abandonment of its roots in terms of economic policy. But they've also, in their, I would argue, in their approach to identity politics and the culture wars, they're also shouting down, they and their fellow travellers, shouting down people who want to have a conversation about those things. That is the antithesis of free speech.
I saw a meme the other day online which says, the left says, be kind with its lips, but its eyes say, or else. And, fascists come in many colours: black shirts, red shirts, green shirts, blue shirts, all kinds. But they all have one thing in common, and that is that they don't like people who disagree with them.
Yeah. And look, can I finish off with that, which is just where the Labour Party sits at the moment. Many would argue the decline of the Labour Party. But also, I'd be interested in keep it very contemporary, your views on what happened last night in terms of the by-election result in Tamuku Makaurau, where Labour basically took a bit of a toweling against, you'd have to say, a fairly ordinary, no doubt I'll get taken to task for that, but a fairly ordinary opponent who couldn't answer basic questions, had to look for a phone on mainstream TV, and then couldn't even find the phone. So what's going on with the Labour Party?
Well, Labour in the 80s and in the years after the 80s, because of the position it had taken on economics in particular, but also on social issues, found it more and more advisable, at least to those in charge of the party and in government, that there should be as little dissension, as little discussion, as little, debate, frankly, as possible. Labour Party conferences used to be like New Zealand First conferences today. They used to be plenary democracies, hundreds of people debating hundreds of remits, all sorts of arguments, great queues for the microphone, democracy alive, and well, it doesn't happen now. It just doesn't happen. And dissent is not the way to climb the greasy pole in the Labour Party, not at all. And what happened in Tamaki Makaurau this past week should be very concerning for the Labour Party, because Pina Henare should have done a great deal better. He used to be the MP for that seat for 9 years, for goodness sake. He should have taken it at a canter. It shows that its organisation is very, very anemic, if not dead.
You mean getting people out there
in
the campaign?
I mean, the Labour Party used to be thought of as a great machine. It had hundreds of people that turned out on the streets, that turned out the votes. I used to be part of it. And it was a great machine. But it was a great machine because it was a great party. When I joined the Labour Party, it had 100,000 members, for God's sake, right? It was a mass party. It was alive. It's certainly not that now. And Labour's got a real problem, given the result last night, because it will strengthen Te Pāti Māori. What Labour needed to do was beat the crap out of Te Pāti Māori, demoralise Te Pāti Māori, and hopefully, in a year's time, retake the Māori seats. That was its plan, I think, which is now in complete tatters. And it is very bad news for Labour, because now people are going to say, Te Pāti Māori is not going to die. They're going to need Te Pāti Māori to govern. And if Labour needs Te Pāti Māori to govern,
that's going to scare a lot of people.
I ain't going to give them my vote, and myself included. You're not getting my vote while you've got Te Pāti Māori in tow. Sorry. Look, I admire them. If I had been born Māori and I had studied my history, I would want my country back, right? No ifs, no buts, no maybes. I would want my country back. But my ancestors came here in the 1840s, and I got nowhere else to go, so I ain't giving it back. And if Labour can't see, the absolute necessity of telling New Zealand we are not going to compromise on the things that matter, and that means we are not going to form a coalition with Te Pāti Māori. If it doesn't say that, I don't think it'll be elected any time soon.
Well, the point you make that you're not going home, I'm not going home, there's 5 million people who aren't going home wherever that might be, is a very, very powerful one. I think anybody who mucks around with that isn't going to be going very far.
Well, what I say to people is this. Think about our history. Now, the Māori arrived, we reckon, in the 12 to 1300s. They've been here a long time. They built a society at the bottom of the earth, the last place human beings settled, all right? But we arrived here in the 19th century largely. And in the space of 100 years, we built a country. We built a nation. You know, we built
Nation to be
cities.
proud of.
Yeah, that sort of erupted out of the ground, whether they be Auckland or Dunedin, Christchurch or Wellington. You know, we built 7 universities. We built God knows how many hospitals. We laid railway track. We dammed rivers. We did all this. This is something to be proud of, not ashamed of. And, you know, it's that country that I will be willing to fight for.
That's the bit that's worth fighting for.
Yeah.
Chris, really, really appreciate it. Thank you so much for the speech that you made
Well, it was my pleasure.
Convention.
And it was wonderful to be at a convention, a democratic convention with a small d, which reminded me of just what a wonderful thing democracy is.
Chris, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
And that's all for today from FirstHand. I'm Andy Foster. I'm here with me, Chris Trotter. Thank you very much.